Hi guys, is today Tuesday? What week is it? What month is it? I don't.
Tuesday. Yeah, it is Tuesday.
It's Tuesday. I think
But
it's.
I had to think about it for a
Hi,
while.
it's Tuesday afternoon, evening all. I'm Mike. This is Jerod. Actually, I think Jerod is this way. Jerod, I've had this nonsensical back and forth with this program because everything's the opposite direction of what I think it is, but then Zoom is the right direction, and so every time I think my head's too far this way, I start tilting this. It's very confusing. Guys, we are talking about content curation, which will explain what that means. We'll just say broadly right now, we're talking about playing the host. I've talked about that in other sessions, just being the host and what that means in terms of creating connections and making people trust you, being the filter for people. This right now, I think lawyers especially understand being the filter, especially we understand thinking we're the filter for everybody. So we're going to talk about that. Jerod Morris from, where do you tell people you're from now? I can't say copy blogger anymore.
No, not copy blogger anymore. Unemployable.
Jerod
that would
Morris
be one place.
That's a funny title.
Yeah, just don't say it to my dad, because then he's like, "What? Unemployable?"
Yeah, that's funny. I told my mom recently that for the last, I don't know, year or something, every job I've gotten has been from Twitter. And she's like, I don't understand what you're saying. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Speaking a new language, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, guys, we are, I'm going to close my Safari window now that I know things are going. And yes, Safari sucks, but it's better than Chrome on a Mac because there's all kinds of weird stuff. And I think my video stalled because I did that. Technology is hilarious. Remember, hashtag not a tech conference. So remember, guys, you can post questions in the below space, and it will come over to my right, and I can drag them over into this video, share them with Jerod, and then he and I can talk about it. We've had a lot of conversations about content-y things during this conference, but there are not many people who know more about this stuff than Jerod Morris, who's been around this world for a while. So, Jerod?
That's awfully kind of you to say.
Well, once upon a time, if I got the story right, you were working up at like a call center or something, and that's where Brian plucked you from? No, you were doing a tech. You were like tech services or something. What were you doing?
I like how that story has changed so much over the years.
So you were milking cows in the morning, yeah, and at night flying a rocket pack. Tell me more.
Yeah. No, so that's how I started working with Brian at Copyblogger, because they were in the process of creating Rainmaker.
Oh, wait,
and
stop, hold on. I have to do so you can't see this, but in Ecamm, I can drag questions over.
Ooh, okay.
Steve Fisher, who is a lawyer that I've known for a while, down in Rockport. I took his practice over in Rockport. He asked a question that I'm going to bring over. He said, forget lawyers. Will Indiana pick up any transfers? And at first, I was like, what the hell is Steve Fisher talking about?
Okay.
I had no... But now you get to answer questions. So forget everything I asked you.
Is this just going to be all IU basketball
questions?
questions?
Yeah, tell me about the other thing. Tell me about the other thing, because you have another thing.
Yeah, the assembly call.
The assembly call.
So wait,
are
we sure that this is Steve Fisher, the lawyer, or is it Steve Fisher, the old San Diego State and Michigan coach?
I legit don't know
sure
what you're
he gets
talking
this
about.
joke. I'm sure he gets this joke all the time.
I have no idea.
Yeah, so the assembly call, that is, it's an IU basketball podcast and post-game show that we've had since 2011.
I bring real people. Okay, Steve.
Right.
I have Shelly in the group giving the chant that has never made sense to me, rock chalk, talking about Kansas.
I don't know exactly what rock chalk Jayhawk means. I think it just rhymes.
Apparently, there was something called chalk rock, which is like a kind of stone that was in the middle, and there was a bus ride or something. Anyway, but Steve actually says, Jerod referred to me in one of his shows. I watch it often. You are famous in like the weirdest way right now for this group. This is like, it's not for all the work that you've done teaching content to lawyers, among others. It is that you have this niche-y basketball show. That's why people on here know you.
Well, I mean, the only reason you asked me on here is because Juwan Morgan is on the Utah Jazz, and you just wanted to feel close to him somehow. So you're like, "How about that podcaster guy?"
Is he really? Yeah, you're right. He's like the 13th guy on the depth chart. But yes, he's there.
He is.
Yeah, he's definitely there.
Yeah.
Shelley said that it refers to limestone. I want everybody to pause in this very informative live video that has nothing to do with anything we were talking about. Rock chalk refers to the limestone. Now
okay, I did not know that, but now I do.
Now
now I can see the questions come up here. Okay, I got it.
Oh, on like the Facebook Live?
Yeah, I didn't have this before.
So, Jerod...
wait, are we going to talk about transfers to Indiana? Because Steve asked a question.
Is that like a real thing? Are you actually going to do that?
Yeah, I mean,
you got to do the briefest version.
Question,
this is not this audience, bro. Okay, do it fast. Answer the question.
Probably not. No.
Well, excellent.
I don't think there's going to be any good enough ones for this round, but maybe next year.
Okay, I don't watch college basketball, but because I just find it unwatchable. And which is funny because people who watch college basketball think the NBA is unwatchable, but that's a side thing.
I don't know. I think that anyway. I think that's made some people talk about that like it's a bigger deal than it is. If you're going to bring this up, I mean, we're going to have to talk about some of these things.
Well, I'm not going to talk about soccer. Here's my pivot. Watch this.
Okay.
Several weeks ago, Rudy Gobert of the Utah Jazz tested positive for COVID-19 right before a game with Oklahoma City. The league decided that night to shut the games down. The next day, we saw a cascade of businesses shutting down in response to coronavirus. This includes later guidance from governments that law firms are not, in fact, essential businesses, closing all of these businesses. The question now, Jerod Morris, is how do these businesses that are no longer open still attract attention in the online world?
That's a great question.
Did you see that pivot?
That was really good.
That was really I'm a professional, people.
Well, by the way, what was the response to lawyers not being considered essential? Because, I mean, for some people in some circumstances, obviously, they're extremely essential.
Two responses. One was, dude, how do we administer justice without these lawyers? We can't figure that out, which reveals a whole other issue with why are these legal processes necessary? When are they not? They're not necessary a whole lot more often than we want to admit. Most of the issues with demand in the legal industry is not about demand. It is about it is about demand. It's not that we're not supplying enough supply for the justice gap. It's that a lot of people just don't want to deal with lawyers. So that's issue one. Issue two was lawyers all noticed that the liquor stores were still open, and they said, it's fine. Yeah, it's fine. I don't mind my firm
essential businesses.
Yeah. I don't mind my firm being closed if I can still get some liquor. I was going to make a liquor joke, but I actually don't know anything about any of that. I just buy stuff to cook with. I got some spiced rum upstairs that I made like an apple thing with the other day that was really good. But
we should have done this like virtual happy hour style. Had drinks, Which, by the way, I've been doing those. Oh, you have a drink. And those have been great. A lot of fun. I don't know if you've done any virtual happy hours or if folks watching this have done them, but
you really should not drink Monsters at 7 p.m. And I know you're all thinking that right now. But my work schedule right now is a little untraditional. Non-traditional? Whatever the word is. Steve Fisher says, oh my gosh, Steve. We went to the governor, the Office of Court Administration, and they backed us, but the governor waffled. The Texas governor. You don't care
Texas governor.
Yeah, you probably have not been paying as much attention to this, but the Texas governor and lieutenant governor, there's some... Anyway, yes, I've been going to a bunch of happy hours. I talked to a guy named Mike Ramsey yesterday, who's a person that you may not know. He runs a company called Nifty Marketing. They're in Idaho. It's actually a really cool business. He's spoken at Moz and all these. Like, he's a big deal. As Mikes go, he's a pretty big deal. And he said, we were talking about, how to build social capital right now, how to be productive when we're not sure what to do with our time. And he said, just to butter me up, you do things just like this conference. You host something. You bring something together for a group of people that wants to be given some kind of direction.
Yes.
I'm pivoting again.
I mean, you're doing a fabulous job because I can see where you're going with this.
So we can get back to the, you know what I mean? So tell me about playing the host. I know Seth Godin has been on Brian's show, and you've talked to him about this idea of being the impresario, the host. Why does the host get this special, kind of result when they're bringing things together? What is it about? Why does that host not have to be the super nerd expert? What is it about bringing things together that creates value for people?
Well, because we live in a time of content abundance. I mean, almost everything that can be created online is out there. And now is especially a really interesting time because you have a lot of people who are home that might have some extra free time. They can't go out and do stuff. So a lot of people are channeling that extra time into content consumption online.
And the liquor store.
Well, that too. But it's like, okay, where do I look? There's so much out there. And so, now as someone who can actually go out and curate, who can go out and sift through everything that is out there, find the important stuff, add context to it, see how things connect together, you're doing a real service for the audience because it's saving the audience time and it's layering context on top of whatever it is that they're learning, that they're reading about. And so, there isn't a huge opportunity anymore to go out and, create the thing for the first time because someone has probably done it. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't any opportunities out there,
right.
But the great thing when you actually go through this process of curation and try to be this person that's bringing it together, that's also the process for finding the gaps where you can step in and actually create something that's meaningful.
Yeah,
so it conveys a lot of benefits to you as the person who's doing this because you don't have to recreate a bunch of stuff that's already there. You can compile it together, add context to it, but then you're going to find the important gaps. And so you don't waste your time creating something that's already created. You create something new that needs to be out there.
I was thinking about like Netflix, which especially when they started with digital, you could get digital movies over on Apple or whatever and go buy it, but they had this really interesting business model where there was the subscription piece, but they were also trying to make it so their algorithms made it so that you would find things that you wanted, right? They're doing this digital curation thing. And it wasn't until later that they created a production company to do original content, right? They did a long time, and we talked about this a little bit, but the Stranger Things example is a really interesting example that I give all the time. They went through so much time of curating, of seeing what people's preferences were, that when it came time to create Stranger Things and it was proposed to them, the people who proposed Stranger Things to Netflix had been rejected by like 14 studios beforehand. Yeah. But Netflix could go, oh, our data tells us that people are super into this thing. We're going to add, make sure to focus on this and this and this and this. And people ate that thing, that super weirdo show up. Because then,
that show was a revelation when I first watched it. It was great. It's, it also has kind of an interesting story because my wife and I watched it like the week before my daughter was born. And this is, so my wife was, 8 months pregnant, really uncomfortable. So we had to like sleep out on the couch together. So we're watching just like whatever shows are coming up. And we just happened to find that one randomly. Man, I loved it. It was great.
Is your wife standing right next to you right now?
No, she was actually. She did come in.
Hi, Heather.
But then she left. Hi. Mike says hi.
Nicole told me to tell you hi, by the way.
Not wearing a vest today, too.
I know. It is so depressing because Jerod used to have this brandy thing where he would walk around in vests all the time. But now that neither of us fits in our vests anymore because the apocalypse hit.
I was cleaning out my closet the other day, and I looked at these old vests, and just kind of this wistful tear kind of fell down the side of my eye. Yeah. It's like, oh, those were the days.
And then I ate more cookies.
Yes.
So anyway. You get what I'm saying, Jerod. Back to professionalism.
No, but that is a good point, because it's funny. Like Stranger Things was this show that I didn't know that I like if you would have asked me, I never would have described that as the show that I wanted to watch. And yet Netflix knew it and they put it out in front of me and I watched it and it was great. And, this is, so we talked, right there, a couple minutes ago about, why right now is a good time to curate and kind of the very, very high level for why there's an opportunity. But one of the biggest benefits down the road is just this process of curating. It is absolutely one of the best ways to actually learn about an audience and to learn what they like and to learn what problems they have and to learn what moves the needle with them, to the point where you don't really have to go out and ask them what they want or what service they might want or what product they might want. You have all of this, behavior-based evidence to just look at and to really know what to do. And that is invaluable, and that's obviously what Netflix does, and that's what they did there. So, that's why, just in terms of, as kind of a longer term strategy, if you're trying to learn about an audience or build that connection with any type of audience, it's such a great way to do it.
And I'll say, as Steve Fisher continues to ask questions about Indiana basketball, that you're just going to have to go back to the thread later and answer, because I don't know what either of you are talking about. You're looking
Trace Jackson Davis will probably go pro after next season.
You're legit looking at it right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve came to the right place.
This is how live works, people. I was going to say something brilliant. It was going to be so good, and then you just threw me totally off my rhythm. I cut up a lot of pork last night for recipes. If you guys want my information on a Cuban pork recipe, like a stew that I made this last week, like a chili, it had plantains in it. The sweet potatoes too. If you ever put sweet potatoes in your chili, make sure you roast them first, because otherwise the texture gets really weird. That's true. That's me diverting attention to the stuff that I want to talk about.
Do you do a lot of cooking?
I do the cooking. As I shared on Sunday, early in my marriage, I decided to give my wife some pointers about a recipe that she made one night, and I have had to cook every night and have not had sex since.
How? Okay, so which brings up an interesting question. Where do you get your recipes from?
So,
where do you find new techniques from?
I have an obnoxious answer. Hi guys. When you get to play the host, you get to talk about whatever the freak you want to. That's the other lesson from this topic. So
true.
I had no idea how to cook. I grew up in a household with a mom that was raised by. She was born in the 50s. She was born in 51, and so she was raised by Great Depression people, and her life period was the cook out of a can period. This was the period in American history where we were trying to figure out how to put savory dishes into gelatin. And so you can go back and look for like recipes, 1950s Jell-O molds with hot dogs floating in there, and it's just wrong. And so my mom would like make a lot of canned stuff. She would, she would can her own stuff. I didn't like it very much, and so I had never learned to cook. And then I lived in Italy for 2 years, and I had to cook for myself and learn from these Italian grandmas. And so my cooking has always been more technique driven than recipe driven. So I shared, actually, God, I can't remember the name of the book now. It's a book about, as a chef, as like a cook in your house, you figure out flavor combinations that work and techniques that work, and then you never need a recipe again because you're just playing, right?
Yeah.
And so after I made that chili the other day, my wife says, that was maybe the best thing that you've ever made. I was like, oh, thank you. I have no idea how I would make that again. Because I totally
fall into
forgot.
I fall into that same trap. And I enjoy cooking a lot more that way. I don't really I will follow a recipe, but I don't like it as much. But that's interesting. But I brought that up because that's an interesting area where curation is happening all of the time online, and really successfully.
You pivoted. Well done, sir. Well done.
There obviously there are tons of recipes out there, but there's like the lady that does the slow cooker recipes, and she's essentially curating recipes. Now she may be taking another recipe and adding her own little spin on it, and then putting 2,000 annoying words of description at the beginning before you actually get to the recipe.
Some people like
I've
that
never
crap.
quite understood.
Yeah,
there are
some people who read that and are like, "This is great." Maybe their assumption is the people who just want the recipe will just scroll to the recipe, and the people who want her personality or whatever. Because my sister's crazy for that Pioneer Woman lady. It's about the personality of that lady. Yeah. It's not about the recipe. The recipe is just a nice to have. She wants the story.
But if you think about it, but if you think about that, right? Like, I'm the person who just goes to get the recipe. But for the most part, I'm not staying there. I'm not subscribing. I'm not commenting. I couldn't even tell you probably where I got the recipe from. Yeah. But your core audience members, the people that are probably subscribing and paying for your stuff or donating to your site, they are probably the ones who care. Right. So it does make sense to serve those people. And the rest of us will just go get your recipe and give you the ad revenue.
I want to tell you something. Speaking of things that will bore the people who don't care, let me tell you about my book. But
how much do you like being able to say that sentence? Like, that's a cool sentence to be able to say.
Let me
tell you about my book.
Yeah, it's got sex appeal.
It's cool.
It is cool, and it was a lot of work. And I talked about this with Mike Ramsey. I think there was a day that, getting back to your thing about the content opportunity and what it used to be, there was a day where you could go write every 300-word post about something, long tail search terms, and you could dominate the first page of Houston Divorce Lawyer. That day is gone. Because,
I work with those people.
Yeah, because now the directories, the Avos and the Fine Laws and a bunch of companies you don't know, but this is the same in every industry. The front page is not run by small businesses anymore. They're run by huge businesses that are putting out crazy amounts of content. And so the content opportunity is different, right? It's like if you were to write a bunch of 300-word long tail keyword posts now, it would just add to the noise, right?
Yes.
So what you're talking about is going at it, and what Mike Ramsey talked about, which I thought was interesting because I knew I'd be talking to you, was he was like, I would not do that anymore. I would write one huge thing, right? Or do one big anchor thing. Your podcast, your YouTube channel, whatever. You got one big anchor thing. And then you just go out to social and you talk about that thing and you engage with that thing all over the place. And it's interesting because writing a book is really, 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 really hard. Was easily the most grueling thing that I've done in a long, long time. But curation is like it's a weird in between because it's like it's an anchor piece. It's an anchor, right? It's a thing you can bring people to. But the lift is not, at least technically, the lift is not that hard, right? Being the insightful person who understands the audience and knows how to speak to them, that's, if not hard, it's rare, right? Talent really surfaces with this exercise. Is that?
Yes, it does. It does. Well, I mean, look, anybody can curate because, when it comes, maybe you're curating a newsletter, you're curating a blog post, whatever. Like we've seen link roundups for as long as the internet has been out there, and those are fine and they serve some use. But definitely not everybody can curate well, because really good curation is not just about finding the stuff. Next Draft doesn't work because Dave Pell can go pick out the top 9 news stories of the day. It works as well as it does because he adds useful, humorous, interesting context on top of it. Summarizes the article, kind of leads in. It's obviously got his bias in there, but you're there for his bias.
Right.
And so that's part of it. It's a big part of it. And so I think sometimes people will actually shy away from curation because it's like, well, okay, I'm just going to be sending my people to other people's stuff.
Right.
Where do I come in? And it's like, well, that's the essential part of it, because anybody can do the sending people elsewhere. What is really going to make people lean in and connect with it and subscribe to it and open it and share it and actually give you the benefits of it is if they're getting something from you. The context that you're bringing, the cleverness that you're bringing, whatever your special sauce is that you bring, that part of it is absolutely essential for it working.
And really, the interesting thing about I'm sending people somewhere else is inherent in that is everybody opened your email that went to someone else. So if you have 10 things, and you've got 10 people, each person is going to watch or read one of those things that you're curated, but all 10 are going to go look at you. In truth, you being the host are the most visible, the most likely to get connection. And this event is, and this has been true every year. This is a curation effort. I'm going out and bringing smart people together to answer the question. I get to ask the question, right? I get to be the person who pulls everybody together, but that's the personality that translates. And Barry asked a question. I want, for some reason it's not letting me bring he must have put it in a reply, so I can't bring it over to the video, guys. But I'll read Barry's comment. To be clear, is a curator a host? And I think this is fair because you and I are nerds for this, so we might be more clear on what this is. If so, the host has to still be appealing and have something people are interested in. Just super basic, what is curation? How is that similar to these host things that we're talking about?
So the way that I defined content curation in the original video is the process of distilling and adding context to a crowded content marketplace, right? Which is everything that we've been describing here. And so...
Sorry, distilling?
Yeah,
Adding
distilling
context.
and adding context.
Okay.
And you got to have both of those things. So you're taking this crowded content marketplace, you're picking out the important stuff, so that's the distilling part, and then you're adding context on top of it. And that adding context is doing a whole lot of work in that definition. Because that is essentially, kind of where you become the host. Because, one form of curation is an interview show. And if you host a podcast that is an interview show, you are curating. You're taking a subject, you're bringing in the best experts on that subject, and you are curating this content experience for your audience. But you're the one who's still there, kind of adding context to it, telling them why it's important, putting the sequence together, all of those important things. I kind of look at it with curation, and it's interesting that Barry used the word host. It's almost like, Mike, and this is kind of what you're doing with Lawyer Forward, right? Like, it's almost like we're going to a party, and you can look at it as you hosting a party, but it's almost like you're going to a party where maybe you don't know everybody there. It's, all these people are connected somehow. You maybe don't, know exactly who they are, but because I'm there with you, you can bring me and introduce me to the exact person that I would connect with, that I need to meet with. But I drove over with you for 20 minutes, so I got to know you. That still confers authority onto you, but you're introducing me to the people that I need to get more with.
God, what is his name? Jordan Harbinger talks about this a lot with the creating an event and curating who shows up. So this party thing is a good example. One kind of host just says, "Hey, I have a party on Thursday. Everybody show up." Right?
Yes.
Another kind of host that he talks about a lot, that Jordan talks about a lot, former lawyer Jordan Harbinger talks about a lot, is I'm actually going to say I'm going to do a dinner party, and I want this person there and that person there and that person there and that person there. He's inviting specific people to try to create a specific kind of conversation. And I think for me, that curation exercise, the thing that you mentioned about distilling, is like you got to have the big question. You got to have a big question that you're answering. And so your partner in crime now, Brian Clark, he's got different curated spots, but I think these two are super interesting. He's got Further, which is about Generation X, so middle-age, people trying to find better lives, and he deals with like wealth and health and something else. And then he also has My Boulder, which is a Boulder, Colorado specific, this group. And with both of these different things, he's looking at that audience and he's gathering information that is useful to them. He's inviting the people to the party that are useful to that group. And I bet that he barely ever overlaps, right? The two groups, because he's curating for a different group.
Especially with those two. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's Unemployable too, which is a different group. So, yes, absolutely.
It's a fascinating technique because you don't have to come up with everything yourself. And as an aside, Barry brought the example of Tim Ferriss. What's really interesting about the Tim Ferriss example is he was really deliberate. There's a book called Friend of a Friend where David Burkus talks about what Tim Ferriss did. He was really deliberate about saying, my target audience is tech-savvy 20-something males. That's what he wanted. He had a specific group that he was trying to get to. And so what Tim did was ingratiated himself to a bunch of people who had those people in their audience. So Tim hosted and networked with and connected with and made those people stars. He lifted those people up who had that audience, and then they looked at Tim as like, ooh, that's a guy I should support, a guy I should help. Again, being the curator is a really interesting thing because you create just a lot of social capital. You create a lot of connection. And,
look, I think sometimes when you talk about content curation, people come to it with different preconceived notions of what that means. I automatically think of curated newsletters. But it can be, different. Like we talked about an interview show, a video series. Like there's a lot of different ways that you can curate. But I think that kind of the big idea to remember, which we hit on a little bit earlier, is like you can sit down and spend the time to create net new content. You can. And if that's really what you want to do, fine. But you're probably not going to get the bang for the buck that you think you are or that you would have gotten 10 years ago. Instead of spending that time doing that, you get all these extra benefits by just going out and finding the best of what's already out there and bringing it together. And you hit on a big one there with Tim Ferriss, which is as you do this and you start sharing content with other people or bringing people on to an interview show, whatever it is, now you've made that connection. And it is so much better, to grow your network and get in with someone that you don't know than just sending some kind of cold email to say, hey, I have a curated newsletter and we, have a guest post in there every single week. I'd love to invite you to write something to our audience. Or I host a podcast. I'd love to bring you on my show, for an interview because I really appreciate XYZ.
Everybody gets on a podcast and thinks they're on Oprah. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
They think they're a superstar. No one says no to a podcast interview. It's fascinating.
No, because people like talking about their stuff. And when you're coming at someone with, hey, I really appreciate your content and your work and, I want to share it with my audience, it helps you grow that. And so it's inefficient and ineffective right now to just be churning out a whole bunch of new content. Now you hit on something earlier that I wanted to go back to, and I think you said this is what Michael said about creating some anchor pieces of content. Mm-hmm. And I wholeheartedly agree with this. And I don't even necessarily, look, your curated content can kind of be like this, but I actually think a smart thing to do from an SEO perspective and just from a cornerstone content perspective is think of 2 or 3 or 4 things that are like your thing that you're going to be an expert in, that you want to be known for, that you might even want to be found and searched for. That would be where you create some huge blog post or some huge piece of content that over time can actually start to develop that. And you can link to your own stuff. You can do some strategies there. But that's the kind of thing where you'd actually want to invest some time in doing it, but not this kind of weekly hamster wheel sometimes that people are on. That just doesn't really make as much sense anymore.
Yeah, that can get tiring. On that, something that I think we might have talked about in our session, honestly, I'm so tired.
Anyway, it feels like it was 4 years ago.
Everything feels like
maybe a couple weeks ago.
Seriously, my wife and I were in Chicago like 3 or 4 weeks ago, and now I feel like I don't know who she is. I don't know where I am. This is not my beautiful wife. This is not my beautiful house. So in the book, one of the things that I talk about a legal supply chain. Essentially what I'm trying to tell lawyers is you don't all have to be the same and you don't each have to do everything. It makes no sense. Specialize more, connect with each other, connect with other resources, right? I'm saying, to specialize and collaborate basically is what the book is about. And in that, I talk about on a spectrum of an issue of accessibility versus expertise, right? Because I'm pointing out you can't be both of those things. You can't do deep work and be always available. Those are not things that work together. And so what I talk about in it is like you could create a business model on one of those two extremes. You can be the freelance expert, the person who really niches on a problem. Your niche is a problem, and you don't care where that problem comes up. You want to talk about that problem. The other kind is the audience-building solopreneur who's like, I care about a vertical, a group of people, a kind of person, and I'm going to deal with every problem that comes up for them. I use the example of Tim Ferriss as the non-expert, as the solopreneur, as this person that builds trust. He is an author. He builds trust by bringing a bunch of people in together. If I'm curating and I decide to be one of those kinds of lawyers or the other, I think the curation exercise is very different. Because in the one case, I'm talking about whatever the audience wants to talk about within reason, right? But I'm really trying to talk to that audience. If I'm the deep expert, I'm not going to create a My Boulder site and talk about local happenings in Boulder. That's not what my business is. I'm talking about, the disposal of nuclear waste given new agreements with Eastern Europe, something or other. And that I'm curating for other experts maybe or other audience builders. It's just a different, does that make sense? So if that does make sense, talk to me about that. Like, how does the business model lead your choices for curating, who you talk to, how you do it, what questions you ask? Does that register?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of it's going to be driven, and you would obviously understand more of the business models of different lawyers, but I think it's going to be driven by that. I mean, if you're yeah, and you and I talked about this. If you're a practice that is going to be much more locally based, and you can talk to anybody in a different locale. That's going to be different than if you're just focusing on one specific topic area. And so, and I think that's all, whenever we talk about any curation strategy, no matter what you're going to be doing, figuring out the audience that you're going to be talking to is the single most important thing. What problems are you going to help them solve? What issues are going on in their life that you're going to be a solution to, all of those things. And so I think you've got to start from there. So, if you are a divorce lawyer, you could, curate about, topics related to marriage and related to issues that people are going to be going through. And it could be helping people, fix their marriages, but then when things go wrong, obviously you're going to be, someone that they have come to trust and that they've come to know. And so you can go very, very deep on that topic for that specific people, even maybe a subset of that, communication issues in marriage, whatever it is. And so I think it's really important for anybody who's going to do a curation strategy is really understand who you're talking to, especially at first. And it will change some as you go and learn more about the audience and kind of learn what the intersection is between the stuff that you're interested in researching, the stuff that you're interested in curating, and then, who out there as an audience you can serve. So I think, so much of it is just context dependent. It's dependent on, the business model that you want this strategy to serve. It's based on the things that you're genuinely interested in, because you can't fake curation. You really can't. I mean, you really have to genuinely love the research part of it. You've got to, and this doesn't mean that if you're doing a curation strategy that sometimes it's not work, it's not a chore. It is. I mean, I love Indiana basketball, and sometimes, prepping for a Thursday night show, I'm like, God, but underneath it, there's a genuine enthusiasm for the topic. So all those things kind of play into it. But I think a lot of it is going to be context dependent, just based on, what your business model is and who the people are that you're really trying to serve. Like, who are the clients that you want? What are the problems that they have, and what is it that you can help them with from a content perspective, from an information perspective, so that when they get to a point of, hey, I need a lawyer for this, I need a service provider for this, that you're the person that they think of. That's kind of the long-term play. And the benefit is you go over time, if you do it right and you're engaging with this audience regularly, you may think of new ways to serve them that you never thought of before. Right. Extensions or different, whatever extensions of your business model, whatever it may be. And that discovery part, not just the discovery of the content, but the discovery of information about the audience, is one of the best parts of curation. Because Nina asked a question about, how can we do what Netflix did? What are ways we can collect and examine the curated content we put out? This is why curated newsletters are great. And this is why curated newsletters with links are really, really good, because every time you send one of those out and you have an audience that engages and they open and they click on stuff, you can gauge what they're interested in based on the stuff that they're clicking on. And you may see, wow, people are really, really clicking on this particular topic. I didn't think it would be that important. Let's follow that down a little bit. Maybe this has become more of an issue than,
Yeah. So like, just to give an example, and I'm sure this is true of all email providers, I use Active Campaign. Is that what it's called? Yeah. So I use Active Campaign, and I could tell you right now, I could pull it up. It'll show who clicked on what link in a given email that I sent out. Yep. And so if you send out an email newsletter and it's got, here's a topic about this, and here's a topic about this, you can see exactly what did they click on, what drove interest, so that next week you might be able to explore that more. Yeah, obviously we're not going to have the data set of a Netflix, right? Like,
no,
we can't. No. We just can't get to those numbers. But you can have a more informed choice than, here's what I'm interested in, but here's what I'm interested in a bad approach? Because that's some of it is like the personality of the host, what they care about.
Yeah, I mean, right? that's where it starts with you. But then, and I mean, obviously any topic that you pick, it should be based on your understanding, again, of the people that you're serving, who's going to read this, what are the issues that they're facing. Everything needs to flow from that. But then there's a lot of information within there that you can get because maybe one thing is more important than the other. Maybe there's a thread within, this one particular topic that you weren't really thinking about that you can kind of go down that road.
But I want to get a little practical with it because I'm a little worried about lawyers feeling like I should be spending my time sending a bunch of emails to people. Lawyers are sort of a weird, because we're service providers as well as experts often. Mm-hmm. I don't think I would ever read a newsletter from a dry cleaner, right? Like, no matter what the newsletter talked about, a dry cleaner is not a business subject that I think about a lot. So if you're sending out a weekly newsletter that's about here's what's adjusting in the family law courts, right? Here's the recent legislation, and here's that's divorced people don't want to read a news, like people who are going to get divorced 5 years from now. I was thinking about this in terms of email marketing. The reason you like an email newsletter is because email marketing is really effective. And so you want people to read your email each week because when they get to the buy position, they're going to push the button. All cool. But for this subject base, I worry about if a lawyer sends a bunch of emails about a thing that somebody doesn't have an immediate need for, they're not even going to engage with that thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So how does the family lawyer in, Mobile, Alabama decide what should I write about each week? What should I curate each week?
That's a really good question. And I think it's, again,
figure it out, family lawyer.
I think there's some different approaches that you could take to that. If you're a family lawyer in a particular area, I think some of it also is going to be how much are you going to devote to this? How much time do you have to devote to it? Because you could go out and try to create a real connection in the community, and be someone who curates community information together as a play for, hey, by the way.
Yeah, we gave that example. I think you and I talked about Morris Lilienthal, this lawyer who I actually think is in Alabama, as an aside. But Mark Homer talked about him during his session. He's got the Mo Show, and it's like, I think it might be a Facebook Live or a streaming YouTube show, where he just brings local community people in to talk about what the freak is going on with their thing. So he had the high school champion junior varsity something or other basketball team, and they're just on a Zoom call on the other side, and he's just hosting these people. He's just talking about community stuff.
Yeah, and that would be one way to do it. Now I don't know what some of the issues would be here, so you can tell me, because this might be a terrible idea. But family court, as I know from some personal experience, is ripe with good stories. not from immediate personal experience, but
so I'm calling Heather later and being
extended personal experience.
Right.
My extended family has had some interesting interactions in family court. And you could curate stories from family court that would be interesting for people to read. Now, again, you'd have to change all of the information. And is that the best idea? I don't know if that's going to really connect with your audience and with the people that you're trying to connect with.
Though curated stories, there have been businesses that have been built on this.
Yes.
There was a guy in Houston that did this, that he would just pull out crazy stories and lawyers would sign up for this thing. He's just pulling out crazy stories. It even got to, I wish I could remember the name of the thing, but he did this. It was a paper newsletter, I think, like a front and back paper newsletter. And he would send out just these wacky stories. It was called like the Otter or the something. And he would send these wacky stories of recent cases that happened. And lawyers would sign up for that. I don't know why potential clients would sign up for that, but referral sources will, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it sort of depends on your business model again.
And I would say, Mike, I don't think this is a model that's right for everybody. So and I don't think you do either. I think it's something that if you're going to do it, you want to think creatively about it. It shouldn't just be an email newsletter with some links about this or that thing. What is the the thing I think people underestimate too much about curation, which we talked about earlier, with the adding context, is, the person who's doing the curation, they've got to bring something special to it. Are you clever? Then you could link to stories and have your clever little takes on them. Are you a good storyteller? Then telling stories might be a good part of what you do. Do you just have this technical brilliance in a certain area so you can, you can bring stuff together like the comp quantum guy, right, where his basic thing is going through and just doing this really, really deep research and curating this for other lawyers, and so I think you really want to think about what's kind of the special thing that I could bring, to this. And if it's, if that isn't immediately identifiable, then this might be something to wait on, because even curation now, there's a lot of people out there doing this kind of thing, and so because there's content everywhere, as we know. So
it's if you're the audience builder kind of attorney, I actually really think this is a really good strategy, because you can play the host and you can bring in a bunch of subjects, and your job is not to be the expert, it's to feature experts. I think for that business model, this is a really good approach. But if you to just get a little tactical, I was curious, do you know what is going on with podcasting right now? Like, it seems like everybody's
podcasting.
Yeah, everybody seems to be starting a podcast, because you've got a lot of bored middle-aged white guys with humanities degrees. I'm not saying me, I'm just saying people. And so you've got all these podcasts exploding. Is listenership of podcasts exploding? Do you know?
Listenership is improving. So I think the latest number I saw is that 75% of people have heard of podcasts now, which is good. And that number continuously goes up. Yeah. And I think it was 36% or 30, somewhere in the mid to high 30s of people have actually listened to a podcast in the last month.
I'd be really curious to know, though.
Continues to grow.
I'd be curious to know how coronavirus is affecting that. Like, are more people listening?
Those numbers were taken before that. So, yeah, I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see how that goes, because there are, on the one hand, there's fewer
people going
commutes.
To work.
Yeah. But, there's more people at home ostensibly with free time. Although, I don't know, if you have a child and your wife works, there's not a whole lot of free time.
The number of people,
I have less free time to listen to podcasts now.
The number of people who would rather listen to me talk about law stuff than be with their families. I mean, it's a huge number. It's a huge number. Steve said he has to go, but he's great that we
Steve
know
does have
each
to
other. I think it's funny that you two know each other. That's funnier to me than me and you knowing each other. But anyway, sorry, go on.
Thank you for coming, Steve. It's nice looking over in the comment section and seeing talk about Indiana. It made me feel at home. This is like how it goes when I'm doing a show on Thursday night. No, but the other thing about podcasting is, so the number of listeners is growing, but also the number of shows and the number of options that each listener has is just exploding.
Right.
And so I think one of the biggest differences in podcasting now, and I suppose it's really the same thing for newsletters, and it's really the same thing for any type of content. It used to be, I've got to get people to subscribe. And that's true. And that's always the first step. You do need to get people to subscribe. But what's even more important now is thinking, okay, like, subscribing is just the first step, because now you've got to get people to read and engage or listen, whatever it is. So just getting into someone's podcast app, well, podcast listeners are really, really loyal. I think it's 50% or more of podcast listeners listen to 3 or fewer shows weekly. Like, they're really, and then, a bunch of other people listen to more shows, but it's not that big of a number.
Right.
And so you've really got to, you still have to compete once they're subscribing. Same thing with an email newsletter.
I think, like, people feel like there's too much stuff. I'm not going to make the podcast is a great example of this. There's too many podcasts, so there's no room for me. I sort of feel like it's the opposite, because we've created enough saturation that people think of it as a go-to media source, to the point that you can get niched. You can get really focused.
Yes.
Where it used to be in the early days of podcasting, to get, 1,000 listeners even, you had to be broadly interested. You had to be super generic. You can only talk about really broad things, your news and politics and sports, right? You got to be big, broad subjects. Now, I mean, you can create a friggin' underwater basket weaving podcast, and there's enough listeners now that you're going to get 1,000 underwater basket weavers. You can get really niche-y now.
You can. And really that's the best way to do it. Unless you already have a big platform, you have to go niche.
Same with newsletters, to your point.
Yeah, the other really interesting thing with podcasting that you're seeing develop is it is still an interesting strategy for developing a new audience. And you can still do it if you have the right strategy, the right positioning, all of that stuff. But it's really becoming you're seeing a lot more podcasts start to communicate with existing audiences. So a corporation starting podcasts to communicate with employees, organizations creating podcasts to communicate with their members. So not a strategy for, hey, let me go get in Apple Podcasts and hit new and noteworthy and develop a new audience. It's, hey, I have 20,000 people that are on this list or they're in this group and I need to communicate with them. Well, a lot of them are listening to podcasts now. Let's put out a podcast and get in their feed, since that's how they're consuming content. And so that's the other thing to think about out there is, it's not just an attraction strategy anymore. If you have an existing audience, chances are a lot of those people are probably listening to podcasts, or they get certain information from a newsletter. And so it might now really be a way to get in front of people where they already are.
Yeah, that feels like a lot of the reason that I have been using Facebook Live, which I had not. I did a Facebook Live like 2 weeks ago for the first time, and my kids all made fun of me because this is what old people do, apparently, is hang out on Facebook Live. And in the last 2 or 3 weeks I've been doing this, it's gone from, I was just pushing the button on Facebook Live to now I've added some software that makes it prettier. I've improved the lighting. I've got, better sound on it, because I'm just learning these things as I go. But I'm using this for not an attraction strategy, but for an engagement strategy.
Yes.
But meeting people where they already are, right? Like people are already on Facebook. So I could just start one of these streams. Podcasts are an interesting, you don't know this, but the Lawyer Forward podcast existed at one point. It is about to exist again under Above the Law, which you don't know who that is, but it's a giant media company in the legal space. They just called me one day and were like, we don't have small firm people. You are someone we want to have a show with, make a show. And I was like, I will unapologetically totally steal the way Seth Godin does Akimbo, and I will do that show. And so
do it.
I'm curious to see what's going to happen with that. So this whole podcast line of questioning was totally self-serving.
If Lawyer Forward were cool, all of this would be TikTok videos. Instead, we're here on Facebook, which is fine.
I'm going to lip sync something and do. I have legit seen professional lawyer people doing lip sync dance videos. People, just stop it, okay?
But people are really doing that,
and then doing the stupid videos where there's like a block of text and they're going,
"Oh my,"
and they're doing the stupid faces. Stop it! Somebody below, tell me why the freak I should want to do TikTok, because I'm just making fun of you as what's happening, says the old guy who's on a Facebook Live video. Anyway.
Okay, but someone please take the clip of Mike doing that just now and put some music to it and post that on TikTok. Yes. That needs to go on TikTok.
They're all doing these stupid faces where they're like...
It's ridiculous.
Marketers ruin everything. Lawyers who are marketing ruin everything. Happens every time.
Yeah.
Anyway, I did, by the way, I got the question. This is dorky. I got the question, what is my setup? And you know, as well as I know, that often the tell me about your tech is a cover up, slow things down, I don't want to actually accomplish anything issue. They'll get really focused on the tools and not do the harder work of figuring some stuff out. With that caveat, that
just had that very conversation with Brian Clark earlier today.
You got to get off your asses and do something. I don't care about your stupid technology. But I will tell you, I'm going to give you some low-hanging fruit. This is an ATR 2100 microphone, okay? This is like the cheapest good solution. It was like $60 or something.
Yeah.
Go get it on Amazon, ATR 2100.
That's what all of our hosts on the Assembly Call use.
But you've got the Heil, the
Yeah, I have
expensive,
the Heil PR40. So this is like the next level.
which, by the way, I bought a Heil. I bought the Roadster, the Rode one,
Yeah.
and each microphone is sort of adjusted to different voices. This is the best microphone for my voice. Even
Is it
though
really?
I've tried the other ones,
Yeah.
this one sounds the best. It's weird. This one gets deeper undertones on my voice than other ones do. So
It's
anyway,
funny how that works, but it does.
ATR 2100, really good solution. This arm was like the cheapy, whatever. This probably sounds terrible. This was, I'm just like, brr, brr, brr. Sorry guys. That arm was like the cheapy thing that came in the people. I've also bought this, and I clicked it. The studio lighting, I will say, this lighting was expensive. I went to a legit photography store with my wife, and I purchased a box of the light bulbs in these. These are like the kind with the stand with the umbrella on
Yeah.
it to diffuse the light, because I've got a shiny globe. Thanks, ladies. Those light bulbs are $50 a piece, just to give you an idea of how fancy pants these light bulbs are. The camera is just the camera on my Mac, right? So I will say, if the alternative is you doing nothing, just use the stupid camera on your computer. But with little changes, like the going and getting some light. I think the lighting kit was like $130 or something. Get some decent lighting. Get decent sound. People really care about sound. Screw the camera, because the cameras that's on your devices are great. And just create some video. Video tends to be the easiest for me, especially because using this tool, which is Ecamm for Live, and then we use it for Facebook Live.
Yeah.
It exports a video that I can just grab into GarageBand, drag it into GarageBand, and it will split it into video and audio. I can right-click a button and say, make me just the audio stream out of that. And I can take that audio, I can just put it out on a podcast. Like, you can do so many repurposing things. My point is, guys, just make something. And if you can do it with it's you and a host and you're interviewing somebody, people still dig that crap. I am so tired of lawyer podcasts that are all interview shows, but people like interview shows. They like hosts. They like people who bring other experts in. And that's what Jerod Morris is here for. He's got a cooler setup than me, but I'm not insecure about that, ladies.
You have better lighting than I do.
I was going to make a inappropriate comment about Heil microphones, but I won't. So, Jerod, thanks for hanging out. I know that you probably
Thanks for having me.
You probably don't want any of these lawyers following up with you, but if you did, where would they reach you?
Email me, jared@unemployable.com. And actually, I love it when people follow up, so don't hesitate to do so. Especially Steve Fisher.
He really is ridiculously friendly. Unemployable is also a really good podcast. They've gotten their model sort of switched. Just as an aside, I can say things that you can't say. Their model sort of switched within the last year so that it's very directed now. The podcast is very directed. But I will say, for you lawyers, A, go listen to those. It's really cool what they're doing with this curation model. But B, go back and listen to every episode that Brian did with Seth Godin is Gold, and the episode he did with Dan Pink. I really like the episode that he did with Dan Pink. So go back. And then what's the rocker guy that that Brian loves that he did the episode with?
Henry Rollins.
Henry Rollins. That episode was really good too. So go back and listen.
Henry Rollins is awesome. I was not really that familiar with him until he spoke at our conference. But man, that guy, he stayed afterwards for like 4 hours.
Was I at
talking
that
with
one?
Anybody? That was the one in Denver. Were you at the one in Denver?
I was at the one where Cake played.
That was
a different year. Was it the same one or a different year? I can't remember.
I think that was the same one. I think Cake played at that one.
I have never been
to. They all blend together for me now.
I had never been to a concert. I think the only kind of I've been to like symphonies or whatever because I'm that guy. But I had never been to like a rock concert. And that Cake show, even with the thing totally empty because it was a bunch of drunk old people at a very niche-y content conference, that show was awesome. And my favorite part of it was Peter Drucker, who in your world is kind of a big deal. I said Peter Drucker, Chris Ducker, who in your world is kind of a big deal. Chris Ducker was standing up front with his phone, putting it on Periscope or something, recording, showing the session. And the lead singer of Cake like totally burns Chris Ducker. It was like, put your phone down. No, seriously, put your phone down. We're going to leave if you don't put your phone down. And it was the most awesomely awkward thing that I've ever seen in my life.
It was great.
And Cake was fantastic. That show was great. And I miss going to Denver. And I do not miss going to Dallas. So bless you, Jerod.
Well,
for all that you do down there. You guys follow up with them. Let me know if you have any questions. Remember, you can continue to post questions and comments below.
Yes.
And Jerod will be around. I'll make him, and I will be around. We can talk about this content-y stuff. And then make sure that you look to the left. I'm actually pointing to my right now, but I think this is the right direction. On the left, on the events tab, you'll see the other sessions like this that are happening. Just click going to the ones you like. It will send you notifications. You guys have a good night. I'm going to go eat a brownie. My daughters are making brownies every day.
That's awesome. Good for you.
The apocalypse is weird. I can't fit in my pants. I'll talk to you guys later.
Follow me on TikTok.
Thanks, Jerod. TikTok.
I don't even know what that hand signal was I did.